Hello, folks. Thanks for joining me here at Behind the Headlines. I'm Lee Camp, the most censored comedian in the country in many ways. And I have another great guest for you. As you know, we do these interviews a couple of times a week here at youtube.com/behind the headlines. This is a Mint Press project. And recent interviews have included Chris Hedges, Scott Ritter, Richard Wolff, and Julian Assange's father and his wife, Stella Morris. So you can get all those past interviews at youtube.com/behind the headlines. But today, I want to bring to you an author. He's an author, he's a speaker, he's an activist, and he has a new book out entitled Embracing Limits, a Radical and Necessary Approach to the Environmental Crisis. Not sure if you heard about the environmental crisis, but I think it's going to be important here any day. Please welcome Keith Akers. Hello.
Good morning, and great to be here.
Yeah, thanks for taking the time to join me. So, you have a new book out, but maybe we should begin with how you came to write a book about environmental analysis, the economic underpinnings of how we can create a sustainable world in the future. How did you end up writing this book?
Well, it's a long story, but to cut it short, I've been looking at this all my life. I first became aware that it was a real issue back in 1972 when I came across the book The Limits to Growth. There were a whole bunch of books that came out at that time, as you may, or I'm not sure how old anyone is here, but I was in college. I had just gotten into graduate school at the time. Saw The Limits to Growth, the book in 1972. There was also The Diet for a Small Planet, the Environmental Handbook, and many other books. The Population Bomb, which actually I only came to realize existed a little later. So all these books were about the environment, and then I thought, oh, this is going to take off, but it didn't. And so my dad actually talked to me about peak oil. He back in the 70s, before it was even like a thing. He invited this guy called Hubbard, King Hubbard, to speak for Earth Day in Oak Ridge. And he said, oil isn't going to last forever. It's going to run out at some point, and that the evidence is that it's going to run, that it's not going to run out. Actually, run out. We're sort of having to train ourselves not to say run out, because what you really mean is it will reach a peak of production, and thereafter it will decline. It will continue to be available. We'll probably be, if we're still around, we'll probably still be getting oil out of the ground, 100 years from now. But it's not going to be a major factor.
Since we're jumping to that early, why don't we just continue down that path? It seems like the peak oil argument has initially, it was like it's gonna, early to mid 2000s, it was like it's gonna change everything within a few years, and then they found more and more expensive and drastic ways of getting oil, like hydrofracking, and I guess it's kind of kicked the can a bit.
What happened? Basically, geology makes peak oil a simple issue, but politics and economics make it a complicated issue. So what we saw is that unconventional oil that does not come in conventional ways, according to conventional ways of processing, translation, fracking, deep sea oil coming out of the Gulf of Mexico, tar sands like the Alberta tar sands, and so forth and so on. That came in, and that's more expensive. There's plenty of it, but it's more expensive, and it's getting more and more expensive. And you are seeing effects in the real world now. It's destabilizing the economy, I think, and then you've got politics, which comes into play. All the presidents have tried to deal with peak oil one way or another. Now, I'm not sure exactly how much W. Bush knew about peak oil. Cheney, I think, did know something about it, but probably the invasion of Iraq probably had something to do with it. he is probably thinking to himself, well, we got to deal with oil one way or another, and here's a good excuse. Then Obama came in, and he instituted quantitative easing, which made it easier for people to accommodate higher prices by making it easier to borrow money. And that worked for a while. And then in 2018, it looks like total oil production peaked. We won't know for sure until decades after 2018, because there's always a theoretical possibility some mind-boggling new discovery might come up in the middle of the Pacific Ocean or something like that. But people are looking for oil really hard, and it looks like 2018 may in fact be the peak. Although we've been through this before. It's like I thought the peak was going to be in 2008, but obviously that didn't happen. But everything got messier and more expensive, and then we've got Trump, and then we've got and so forth and so on. It just all goes sort of downhill. That you've sort of destabilized everything and mixed it up.
And but of course, we have multiple reasons we need to get off of oil, or largely off of oil. And you say in your book, and I want to be upfront that normally I read the entire book when I have someone on. Unfortunately, there was a crunch time frame here, and I only received the book a week ago. And anyway, not your fault, but so I've read some of it. So for if there's things I'm asking that are addressed in the book, and I failed to know that, I want to be upfront about that. But your opening chapter is called "It's Not Just Climate Change," and I think this is such an important point that people want to debate about climate change, which is not a debate, but they want to pretend that's the only environmental damage that's going on in the world, and that's all that. So if we can say climate change isn't real, then we're all fine, and we can keep going exactly as is, and it'll all be great. And of course, that's utter horseshit. We're filling the oceans with plastic. We've got peak oil. We've got so many various kinds of environmental destruction.
Yeah, there's all kinds of environmental problems, any one of which could lead to the collapse of civilization or a Great Depression or something very, very bad that we don't want to deal with. There's biodiversity collapse. This actually, to me, is even scarier than climate change, because so far biodiversity collapse has not been driven by climate change. It may have affected a few species somehow, but for the most part, it's been driven by habitat destruction, invasive species, pollution, all these other things
pesticides
that are going on. And like 95% of the large animal biomass on the planet is humans and their livestock.
Yeah.
All the elephants, bison, giraffe, antelopes, all the other large animals, you put them on a scale, it's going to be less than 5% of the total. So we've overrun the planet, and there simply isn't that much of the planet left for anything else.
Yeah, and we'll probably talk about this a little more as we go on, but I cover it a little bit, but you hear it covered so rarely. You hear some talk about big oil, some talk about the harm that oil is doing. You hear almost none in the mainstream media about big ag, about the harm of large scale animal agriculture, which is either the first or second cause of greenhouse gas emissions. It causes ocean dead zones. It causes, like you said, biodiversity collapse. There's so much egregious harm so that we can eat a crazy amount of meat in this country and some other countries and many other countries. But yeah, it's, if you want to talk more about that, because it's amazing how little coverage it gets.
Yeah. And another thing, groundwater depletion and water issues. I saw actually one of your videos dealt with this very good video. The problem is that we're just in the West, the Colorado River goes completely dry by the time you get to the Pacific Ocean. Mm-hmm. And and it's hitting the fan basically right about now, because there's places in Arizona that can't get water. Municipal people places where outside of Scottsdale, I believe, or something like that. And the only solution is, I mean, God's not going to create any more water, no matter how much money we have. We're going to have to learn to live with less, and this may actually be the first big limit that that really bears on our economy. It's so unpredictable. You don't know. There's so many things happening that you don't know which one is going to get us first. But this may be it, and it looks like Biden is going to have to, is going to have to issue some sort of decision or maneuver some decision into place through Congress.
Well, so this is from just yesterday or the day before. Biden administration sidesteps painful decisions for the Colorado River cuts.
Oh dear. Okay.
A new environmental report moves the Biden Interior Department closer to being able to force states to cut water offtake from the river without picking whether California or Arizona must bear the brunt. Something I wanted to ask you about degrowth, and is obviously all of these things are important, decreasing the amount of meat production, meat eating, etc. But in water, there is almost no discussion of changing the way our systems work. Everything from, used shower water could fill your toilet bowl. And I'm talking on massive scales. And there's no discussion of it. I know that one hamburger is 2 months of showering, so I'm not acting like that competes with meat eating. But we don't seem to talk about systems changing at all.
Yeah, well, we need a system change. We need. What I would just suggest off the bat would be that you would divide up the Colorado River water into two portions: one for humans and one for everything else on the planet, and that would allow habitat to recover. And then the rest of it you would just allocate based on you could do it by the good old free enterprise system, just whoever can pay for it. But I would say probably you should give priority in the municipal areas. About half of this water that's being, or more than half, I'd say, the Colorado River is being drained for, is going to livestock, either crops or directly to livestock. So it's like, well, this is easy. Just get rid of livestock agriculture, problem solved. It may not be quite that easy, but that's the general thing that I would not prioritize livestock agriculture, which is damaging in so many other ways as well, creating all this methane, contributing to global warming, and so forth and so on.
So, and I have plenty of my own answers to this, but what is it that's getting in the way of people decreasing meat eating, decreasing animal agriculture, etc.?
Well, it's a concatenation of factors, but I would say ultimately it's that partially it's greed. It's just like capitalism, and that's part of it. But I think that we've had capitalism for quite a few years and hadn't had anything like this happen yet. And socialist countries haven't always been, totally with the environmental program either. Like the Soviet Union, you had soil erosion there. They burned fossil fuels and so forth. So I'm a little leery of just saying it's just. I think that maybe getting rid of capitalism is a necessary condition, but not a sufficient condition. We need to talk about specifically what's going to happen. That's why I don't use terms like capitalism and socialism a whole lot, because I'm afraid that people are going to draw the wrong conclusions. They're going to say he's one of us. No, he's one of them. Etc. So I want to be very specific about what actually needs to happen. And what needs to happen is that in case of water is that we need to reduce water consumption because there's only so much of it and the Colorado River is already gone.
But I would say that one of the biggest things that's stopping us from reducing water consumption is a capitalist system that puts dollar signs on everything, right?
Yep.
I'm not saying, so I think there are many ways that human society can be organized. And so to say it's just socialism or capitalism, I think is too reductive. But Yeah, we live in a system where you have a corporate American system that largely influences or basically owns our government in many ways, and so they're never going to do anything that hurts their bottom line. They're not going to decrease meat production. They're not going to decrease theft of water, like Nestle now Blue Triton it was paying $200 a year for millions of gallons of fresh water in Michigan. Yeah. They're not going to stand up and say, "Hey, we're going to stop doing that."
Yeah, what you have now is competition between the elites. You have they can't. It's really the real conflict, the potential for like actual conflict is coming because the elites are competing, and not because at least of the masses rising up in revolution or anything like that, which looks a little far off right here in the United States right now.
Yeah, it doesn't look like it's necessarily on the horizon.
So the potential for violence, that is, I think, is coming primarily from elites fighting each other. It's not from people rising up in revolution so far.
So what else does we've kind of addressed a bit of it, but what else is in your chapter titled "Harder Than It Looks"? Why making these changes is so hard?
Oh yes, well, okay. There's a number of problems. One problem, which we just mentioned, is that the elites are against it. Consumption, economic growth. The problem is economic growth. We don't recognize that there are limits to economic growth. There's only so much soil on the planet. There's only so much water on the planet. There's only so many fossil fuels on the planet. There's only so much atmosphere into which we can dump the waste products of all our industrial system into, and thus controlling climate change. So if we don't recognize these limits, we're going to run into them anyway. So it's sort of inevitable because these limits exist. Our economy must also be limited, and that's the problem. We don't really have a framework for dealing with this problem. The economists don't even recognize, or mainstream economics doesn't really even recognize the possibility of limits to growth. And I think you've probably heard of Herman Daly, who's sadly now passed away, and other people from the ecological economics school of thought who've studied this problem for years, and they keep talking to people about it, and nothing happens. Mainstream economics, neoclassical economics, as it's called, doesn't recognize the possibility of limits to growth, and so the economists, therefore, are not helpful, or they're clueless, let's say. So the second problem is that economics profession doesn't really recognize the problem of limits, so nobody's really working on this except a few ecological economists here and there. Kate Raworth wrote a good book on the donut economy. She said that the economy has to take the form of a donut. It can't go outside the outer boundaries of the donut into overshoot, which is pretty much where we are now. But it also has to be sufficiently big to sustain everyone at a sufficient standard of living. So you've got economics. Then you've got the conservatism of science. This is another tricky problem that most people don't realize, that science is by its nature conservative, not politically conservative, but conservative in terms of scientific things. Basically, scientists tend to stick with their established paradigms. Now, you do have scientific revolutions, but they take quite a while for all the consequences to unfold. In 1905, Einstein came up with the special theory of relativity. And this is where E equals mc squared comes in, and nuclear energy. But it took 4 decades later before the first atomic bomb was exploded. So this had revolutionary consequences, this revolution in physics, but it took a long time to unfold, and a lot of physicists sort of rejected it. And the same thing is sort of happening with climate change. The early estimates of climate change, when they went and talked to scientists about the West Antarctic, ice sheet, and so forth, they actually, in retrospect, tended to underestimate the effects because scientists tend to stick with what they've got. And this is especially problematic in the field of economics because economics people are going to tend to stick with what the theories that they've already got, which is neoclassical economics, which doesn't really recognize limits to growth of the entire economy.
Well, and you can't overstate the ability of these massive corporations. Many of them have more money to throw around than most countries, and what they can do to suppress science, to fund the studies in a form that they prefer. And we saw this with one example, Monsanto's glyphosate. For years, the WHO now calls it carcinogenic. Bayer, which now owns Monsanto, has paid out all these lawsuits. But it took years and years of them attacking and going after scientists and destroying their lives and their livelihood and all of that stuff, which delayed those findings and everything for years. So you have that type of game going on as well.
Yeah. So then you've got, on top of that, you got the people trying to suppress what science we've got. We've got some pretty good science now. Another example of that is the McGovern Committee report on nutrition back in the 70s. They saw all the problems that animal products were having on our diet: heart attacks, cancer, obesity, diabetes. The list goes on and on. All the top causes of death are related to, or most of them, maybe 14 out of 15 or so, something like that, are all heavily implicated with consumption of animal products. But somehow it's all controversial. There's, we don't really know about cholesterol. We don't really know about eggs. Blah 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 blah.
Well, and heart disease is it still maybe the number one killer of a certain age people in America? And yeah. So Pittsburgh dude in the comments here is asking, and some others are asking, does degrowth, I can read it, does degrowth entail less food production, less affordable energy, and or a lowering of living standards?
Well, and the quick answer is yes and no. I think that it does entail less food production. We could cut the total agricultural land by about 3/4. That's not going to actually reduce the amount of nutrition that we get, because it's going to all come out of the livestock sector and grazing land. Grazing land is a lot of agricultural land. It's one of the most destructive forms of agriculture in history. But I think that can stop. Now, the total amount of food that you will take into your body will not reduce. But I think that the total agricultural land. Now, in terms of what was the
living
energy
standards and expensive energy?
Yeah, I think, and here's the next thing: if you look at who's doing all the consuming, and this is another point why it's harder than it looks, is that the people who's consuming most. If we're consuming too much, we need a smaller economy. Okay, so who are these people that are doing the most consumption? The rich. Okay, unfortunately, they're the ones that are running our society, and so you have sort of a conflict of interest here. I think the rich have to bear, the elites of our society have to bear the primary responsibility for dealing with this problem, both in terms of their personal life and in terms of the decisions that they make about how the rest of the world works.
And there's also something we mentioned about the fact that I have one article here about how 40% of all food in America is thrown out. And so the systems are insanely not efficient, which of course is one of the great arguments for unfettered capitalism, how efficient it is, but it's hugely not efficient. And something else that it needs to be said when we talk about living standards is, will living standards decline? Well, right now, under the systems we currently have, living standards are awful for billions of people around the world. I mean, there are people who slave over the garments, the cheap garments we get, that earn 5 cents a garment or 5 cents an hour, and have terrible lives. So the living standards for them are not would definitely go up. Whereas would each American be able to have 3 cars and 3 houses? Probably not.
Don't think so. No. Yeah, that's the thing, that that degrowth is, as the first step in degrowth is to establish social justice. That's one of the main things that we could do in a practical sense. If I were thinking about what can we do about this, is a basic income. Is a basic income, established an absolute floor. I think for some people, people in Bangladesh, et cetera, their standard of living should be increased, and their material consumption could probably be increased without putting an undue strain on the world resources. With no problem.
Yeah. And furthermore, when you talk about living standards, like you could be living a very quote unquote rich life, but if you have no fresh water and the water's tainted and the air is smoggy and the trees are all cut down, it doesn't really matter whether you have 3 houses and you don't want to give up your quote unquote living standards.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, I want to hear a little bit more about the biodiversity and what's going on there, because I think that is such an important topic. We mentioned it, but it gets very little coverage.
Yeah, biodiversity collapse, or as I called it, the problem of mass extinctions. We've had 5 mass extinctions in the Earth's history since the Cambrian explosion, which was about 540 some million years ago. And the one that everybody knows about is the one that killed all the dinosaurs when an asteroid hit the planet, and then about 75% of all species, including all the non-avian dinosaurs, died out. But there have been others. The most serious one was the end Permian extinction, which happened about 250 million years ago, as I recall. And it nearly killed everything, and about 95% of all species died, and that was probably because of acceleration of climate change, actually, at the time, through natural processes, through volcanism and so forth. Species are going extinct today at about 1,000 times the rate of the normal rate of extinctions except during obviously a mass extinction event. Today, basically, we're the asteroid. We're wiping out everything on the planet.
Humans are the asteroid.
Yeah, humans are the asteroid, exactly. So one interesting thing is to look at the whole problem of, we're going to get to the non-megafauna in a minute, but I'll start out by talking about the megafauna biomass. Is that Anthony Barnosky talked about biomass trade-off in the Quaternary, late Quaternary extinctions. That's sort of a fancy title. What it means is that there were extinctions in prehistory caused by humans. Human overhunting. Remember hunting and gathering? That was quite the rage about 50,000 years ago. Yeah. Anyway, and it worked. It was great. It really led to our development as a species, but unfortunately, it wiped out about 75% of the megafauna in the Americas, and maybe even more in Australia. And so, because we were great hunters and gatherers, and then after we ran out of things to kill, we had to go to something else. We had to actually plant something and grow something and that's how agriculture got started. This is also the origin of war, because the same skills that make humans dangerous to animals. Now, I'll back up just a moment to say that the one exception to megafauna extinctions was in Africa, because in Africa, humans that was where we originated, and that's when they started developing their hunting skills. And all the megafauna there, all the elephants and giraffes and rhinoceroses and so forth, they learned and evolved to become wary of humans, and therefore they managed to survive. But all the other species on the other continents were not prepared, and so they tended to get more wiped out. Anyway, so the same things that make humans dangerous to animals also make humans dangerous to each other. And so that's how wars got started, is because the people that were really good at this, the coordination, communication, that kind of thing, those kinds of groups tended to survive, and the others didn't make it. So there's sort of a regime of constant warfare that developed. And
right, and there's some other factors, like once you have a group staying in place with agriculture, they then have stores of that agriculture, stores of resources such as the harvest, and then you have fighting over those resources.
Yes, so we have actually sort of a coevolution of society and of ecology at the same time, which all the time constantly interact. And then, so actually, as agriculture developed, now Peter Turchin, whom I greatly respect, and who would I'm going to definitely read his next books also. He says that actually, after the development of agriculture, violence between humans continued, just at more or less at the same rate. But then we had something called the axial age, and at that point, this was when the great empires developed, and that's when spiritual thinking evolved. That's when you had people develop like Confucius, Pythagoras, the Hebrew prophets, the Buddha, and so forth. All these people had ethical ideas, and they wanted to put forward that, don't just go around killing people. Be nice to each other, for crying out loud. Okay, that's the kind of thing that basically the sum and substance of what many religions put forward as their ethical basis. There's pretty much almost a consensus. In fact, many people have commented, the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, and it's stated in different ways in different religions, but it's pretty much found in all of the major religions today. And this was coincidental with the development of the great empires, because once this became infused in human consciousness, then this means that there was greater cooperation. And that means, so then suddenly after the axial age, you have the development of empires in Persia, in India, in China, in Greece. You have the Roman Empire, and then it just takes off after that.
So, a great book that addresses this is Civilized to Death. That addresses everything you're talking about.
Yes.
So let's get into some of the solutions. How you picture degrowth? I mean, do you have a picture of implementing such a thing, or is it mainly, and I'm not faulting it, but is the book mainly just the need for degrowth, or do you also talk about how to get there?
No, I think that I think we can. There's specific things that we can do in each area that needs addressing. For example, in the case of biodiversity collapse, we've got E.O. Wilson's proposal for half Earth. That is, we should set aside half of the Earth for wilderness, for wild things. And I think that would go quite a distance towards solving the biodiversity problem. And there are groups that we've got groups that are working for something like this already. The Center for Biological Diversity. I'll just throw that out as a random comment. And we've got land that we could devote to wilderness out here in the West. So and I never really quite completely finished my
Oh,
my,
the earlier answer.
my other train of thought, which is that
Go ahead.
after the after 1500, we were still at 200 billion kilograms of megafauna biomass. There's a much higher percentage of humans, uh, uh, but it was essentially the same as it was 100,000 years ago. So, but today it's expanded by sevenfold. It's now 1,500 billion kilograms of megafauna biomass. About 2/3 of that is livestock, 1/3 is human, and maybe a small sliver of a percentage is maybe 2 or 3% is everything else. And this is also so people, you probably have seen the statistic of 95% is humans and livestock. But what is the other piece of it is that the total quantity of biomass has increased. There are now more megafauna on the planet right now than there have been in the last 100,000 years, about several times bigger, and probably millions of years, because there's only so much land area on the planet that can only go so much plants, and therefore there's probably a limit on how much megafauna biomass we can have. And it also extends down the scale to smaller animals like insects, for example. Anyone remember? If you're old enough, you'll probably remember windshield bugs. When I was a kid, we would go down, we would take vacations. We were in Tennessee, and we would take vacations down to the Florida Keys during Christmas break for a vacation. And every time Dad would stop for gas, he'd get out and he'd clean the windshield, scrape all the bugs off of the windshield. This was a thing. But have you seen any windshield bugs lately? Probably not very many. If we see one, it's an event. Let's take a picture.
It's pretty rare, and scientists actually use this as a test, which it seems like there must be a better way to test this, but they use the Splat Test, and they've done it recently in various areas, and they believe it shows dire loss of insects in the world.
Exactly. So this is like all up and down the chain. It's not just big animals. It's everything. It's snails. It's everything.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think that this is, and so we don't really know what's going to happen as a result of this, or how we're conducting basically a one-time irreversible experiment. There is, however, Biosphere 2. You may recall the Biosphere. Some decades ago, there was people that said they were going to seal off this whole area, maybe 2 or 3 acres or so, and we're going to try to balance it. We're going to put in, some species of this, some species of that. We're going to create a little savanna, some farmland, a forest, blah blah blah, and we're going to seal some people up and see if they can survive. And the idea was, if we can do it here, we could go off to Mars and create our own little balanced biosphere out there. Well, the experiment didn't. They did make it for 2 years. They did make it for through 2 years, but a lot of strange things happened. There was this one species of ant which sort of took over, and then all the pollinators died, and so forth and so on. Oxygen levels fell. Well, they might have been able to fix that if they had designed the experiment a little better. But there's all kinds of crazy things that happened, and we're sort of recreating that kind of craziness right here in our Biosphere 1, the original Biosphere, as well. So, I mean, this is a wild card. We could go extinct even if we solve climate change, because all that was driving these things extinct is not climate change so far, although it's probably had some effect. It's mostly been habitat destruction.
Yeah. So far, it's largely less related to climate change, but to some degree. But yes, there's an interesting documentary about that. They called it Biosphere 2 because they intended Biosphere 1 to be the Earth, and so they were Biosphere 2. And like you said, they kind of made it for 2 years. Then it came out that they'd had to pipe in some oxygen because oxygen levels were going down. But to me, the real story of that documentary is like there's so much fascinating data and information, and if we had actually put all the best minds in the America on figuring out all of these incredibly important aspects of how to make life sustainable, and instead it became like in the media they focused on like the shit show and interpersonal things, and they ultimately brought in Steve Bannon to run things and try and make them profitable. It's so insane. To me, it feels like it was a completely anti-capitalist experiment that then became consumed by where's the profit, and yeah. Anyway, so some people had some questions about
Sure.
about population and population degrowth, and this is a angrily debated topic because some people say it means that people who believe there's too many people on the planet want to kill people, want to euthanize people, whatever it is, and then other people say that it's not that we actually have too many people currently, it's that the systems that we have set up in a post-scarcity world. I mean, we just mentioned the 40% of food that's thrown out in America, not to mention the endless amount of meat that's eaten that doesn't need to be, etc. People having multiple houses, multiple cars, the quote unquote fast fashion world where people wear a shirt twice and throw it out. So
Yeah.
if you were to use all of these things differently, if the world were structured differently, do we still have? Is it more of a systems issue, or is it a people issue?
Well, yeah, I'm not quite sure what that question means. I would say that it's a
well. In that case, just discuss population. It's
okay. Yeah, if we okay, the whole planet goes vegan, fine. Okay, and that actually would take care of quite a bit of the problem even before we get to climate change, because about half of our problem is due to land use because of all the cattle. I mean, we've chopped down all these forests, and what do these forests have? They have carbon. That we have natural carbon sequestration in the form of forests. So that's let's suppose we can do that. The world goes vegan. Okay, I don't think you can support 8 billion vegans for several reasons. First of all, you've got soil erosion. Soil is eroding about 10 to 20 times faster in the United States than the natural rate of soil formation. Soil is in principle a renewable resource, but it's not something that's going to be renewable too much longer if the rate we're going through it. So this is clearly not sustainable. We've got to do something about it. Now, in other countries outside of the United States and Europe, in other places, it's even worse. It's like 30, 40, even 80 times faster than the natural rate of soil formation. Clearly not sustainable. And we've already seen, even with a much smaller population, we've seen ecological disasters throughout history, and a lot of land is being turned into deserts and so forth. And now it's like we're just doing it more and more massively. So I think we need to address soil erosion somehow. And there's several good ideas about how to do it. Maybe permaculture, maybe no-till agriculture, and so forth. And all of these have maybe organic. I don't think organic just by itself is going to do the trick either. So we've got soil erosion. Then we've got groundwater depletion. As we started out by talking about the Colorado River, that's happening all over the world. You've probably heard about the Aral Sea about a couple of decades ago. That's also a sea that's going dry because all the rivers that flow into it are being siphoned off for agriculture and so forth. So we'd have to stop that too. Then we've got, even with the reduced, now you could say, well, we're going to reduce the land requirements because we're all going to be vegans. Yeah, I'm still not convinced that if it's 10 to 20 times faster, that we're going to be able to feed everybody. Because if it's even if it's 10 times faster, what does that imply? That implies we need to leave 90% of it about fallow. You have to leave 90% of the potential cropland fallow in order to grow allow the land to recover. So when you get into those kinds of things, it's a problem. Also, we've got oil depletion, we've got energy depletion. And we've got the green revolution. So let's talk about each of those. Soil depletion is a problem. Energy depletion is a problem because we're going to run out of oil at some point. We're not going to run out. Okay, as I said, run out is something we want to get rid of. But we're going to. We're not going to have enough energy. And then what powers the green revolution? We've been getting yields in the last century that have greatly increased because of the green revolution. The green revolution relies on energy. It relies on water. And so those themselves are decreasing. So how are you going to maintain green revolution yields in a post-industrial world? I don't know. You might be able to do it, and I'd like to see some people address that. So I suspect that the maximum population is going to be more like 1 or 2 billion. And I don't think we'll have to euthanize anybody. I think that people are going to.
That's nice of you.
People are smart. They're going to be able to see it's already happening. That the rate of the birth rates are declining everywhere, not just in the developed countries, but in the less developed countries also. People are looking around and saying, I'm not sure I want to have that many kids anymore. And so I think it's going to happen naturally. And if we want to implement specific policies that would, we need to hurry the process along about, we've got China's one-child policy. Now, China's one-child policy had some problems, which I discuss in my book. But I think that the one thing that it did show is that it's possible, that it can be done. And the Chinese people actually went along with it. They liked it. And now the Chinese government is trying to say, no, we changed our mind. You can have as many kids as you want, et cetera, et cetera. And they're not buying it. So I think that people are smart. I think that we can put in, we should certainly make birth control possible. We should certainly educate women and so forth, and all the other things that people talk about. But I think that that this is not quite, while there is a need to reduce population, I don't think it's quite as dire as you might think, that we're going to have to line people up and have them shot. And also, this is a bad idea from the get-go, because if you did start using violence against people, who's going to get victimized?
Yeah,
it's going to be people
exactly
that are at the bottom.
Exactly.
The people at the bottom aren't consuming anything.
That to me is one of the key points for those people who say, oh, there's too many people, we have to decrease the number of people on the earth, in some drastic way, like cut off resources or something. It's always the rich countries saying that about the incredibly struggling areas of the world, and it's like, well, who's using all the resources? It's the rich countries.
Yeah. So that's in a nutshell. That's my answer on population.
And in turn, I think people just hear population concerns and they think it's going to instantly be fascist, like you said, lining people up and killing people. But in fact, I don't know if people know this, humans actually naturally die on their own at some point. And so if you have people not pumping out 13 children, then you can have a population decline that does not involve murdering anyone.
Yeah, exactly.
So we're going to wrap up here in a few minutes, but I was wondering, what would be your recommendations just to your average person reading your book or listening or watching, as to what they could be involved in to help create a more sustainable planet? Because obviously a lot of these ideas are very large, and then we turn to our politicians in Congress and they say, oh, just change out your light bulbs and we'll be fine.
Yeah, there's several things that I would suggest. First of all, there's two things that you can do on your own without any change in society, at least in the West. And that is, first of all, plant-based diet. And secondly, don't have so many kids. And ideally, people would limit their, I don't have any kids by choice. And of course, some of us may have already have kids. It's too late, blah, blah, blah. But, and that's okay. But plant-based diets are available to anyone. Plant-based diets are dramatically more efficient in terms of their use of natural resources. The next thing would be to get together and get organized with other groups that are devoted to reducing the ecological destruction of consumerism. I think that, for example, there are groups that are trying to preserve species. There are a lot of people that are doing good stuff. It's like we see the trees, but we don't see the forest. So there's a lot of the nuts and bolts are already in place. We've got people promoting population control. We've got people promoting plant-based diets and a lot of other things. We need to advocate for infrastructure in society that makes simple living possible. Because essentially what we need is simple living on a massive scale. That's true in the United States. That's hard to do because, I mean, you're either a consumer or you're out on the street. You try to ride a bicycle. Bicycles are great. Bicycles, the most efficient form of transportation, not only in human society, but in nature. But, you know, you got to take your life on your hands to get out on the highway and go down on a bicycle. So we need to change the infrastructure of society. We need to work for social justice because we have a basic income. People will be able to accommodate the coming changes, which are basically going to reduce consumption by Mother Nature's plan of degrowth, which is running out of resources. So that's roughly it. So I'd say we need to increase consciousness of limits, that we are that there's only so much of the earth, and we've already exploited quite a bit of it, and we need to preserve the rest of it as best as we can. We need to have simple lives and make simple living as comfortable as possible at a low level of consumption.
Well, thank you so much for this conversation. The book, again, is Embracing Limits by Keith Akers. And, you know, plenty for people to think about and debate. And, you know, step one of making these changes is having these conversations and having these back and forths, which your mainstream media largely will not. So
thanks. Great to be here.
Thanks again. Yeah. All right. That was Keith Akers, and I really appreciate you guys joining me for the hours. I have some wonderful interviews coming up for you next week, as well as my normal live streams, Most Censored News. If you haven't seen the new episode of Most Censored News, that's at youtube.com/behind the headlines. I hope you will go there and check it out. It is about how Monsanto's evil continues even today. Even though we don't hear about Monsanto anymore, I go through how it's all still going on. That's at youtube.com/behind the headlines, and keep fighting.